And one of the studies they did at Mount Sinai, they did the Holocaust studies, and they found that great grandchildren of Holocaust survivors had markedly higher stress hormones within their body and their physiology compared to descendants of non-Holocaust survivors.
Mhm.
And so that's also part of the work when people get into it and they're like, I have these symptoms, but I haven't been through anything. And so that's a form of what we call indirect trauma. And there's incredible research on that. A book I would recommend is called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. It's incredible, amazing. And it's very hands-on too. It gives you certain lineage trees that you can do and things like that.
Welcome to Hacking Your ADHD. I'm your host, William Kerb, and I have ADHD. On this podcast, I dig into the tools, tactics, and best practices to help you work with your ADHD brain. Hey team, this week I'm talking with Britt Piper, a somatic experiencing practitioner, trauma educator, and author of Body First Healing. Britt's work focuses on understanding how trauma impacts the nervous system and brings both professional expertise and a deeply personal understanding of what it means to heal. In our conversation, we start with Britt's story, and then we dive into what somatic therapy actually looks like, how trauma can live in the body long after the mind knows that we're safe, and why the nervous system often gets stuck in survival mode. We also get into the science behind stress responses, intergenerational trauma, and practical ways to start listening to your body's signal instead of fighting against them. Also, just as a quick note before we get into it, today's episode includes discussions of trauma, including mentions of sexual violence, substance abuse, and suicidal thoughts. If these topics are sensitive for you, please take care while listening. Feel free to skip ahead or pause when needed. If you'd like to follow along on the show notes page, you can find that at hackingyouradhd.com/234. All right, keep on listening to find out more about Body First Healing. Well, I'm excited to have you on the show. This is going to be I think really educational for people about these ideas of somatic healing and doing stuff with the nervous system. But I figured a great place to start for kind of setting the stage for that is to hear a little bit about your story first.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Where do I start? Do I start from the beginning?
Wherever you want to, wherever you feel would be great to, not great, but would be help ground people in what's going on and why you got into this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner now. And somatic experiencing, it's a trauma resolution modality where we work to heal trauma through the body and more specifically through the nervous system. I'm an author. I've also been a sexual violence prevention and trauma educator for many years. I work a lot with the military, violent crimes, helping them to understand how trauma impacts the body and the brain and how it gets stored in memory and things like that. And there's the professional side of what I do, but I always say that my research really started off as me search. And a lot of people who work with trauma or who are kind of in this space, I feel like a lot of us have that own personal experience that drew us to this work. And then once you learn about it, you're like, why does no one know this?
Mhm.
So you get really kind of sucked into the knowledge, the modalities, and just how impactful and how wonderful and transformative it can be. So for me, I had experienced multiple traumas throughout my life, earlier years. And it was more so in my late teens that I had kind of these, what we would consider to be acute traumas or shock traumas. So I lost my brother in a car accident in high school when I was 15. And then when I was 20, I was sexually assaulted by a stranger who helped me change my flat tire. And those were the two experiences in my life that really introduced me to therapy, conventional talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mhm.
Um, I was diagnosed with different things, PTSD, depression, anxiety. I was on different medications. And therapy certainly helped. It brought relief to my life, but it didn't bring resolution. I would get into these cycles of I'd be fine for a while and then I wouldn't be. And then I'd be fine for a while and then I wouldn't be. And what that looked like was heavy drinking and substance abuse, severe eating disorders, suicidality. And it got so bad in kind of my late teens and early 20s that I actually ended up in a hospital with alcohol poisoning where I flatlined when I was 18. And then when I was 22, shortly after my trial, my perpetrator was sentenced to 60 years. And shortly after that trial, I ended up in a jail cell because of an alcohol-related incident. So recovery was not pretty for me. I mean, it's not pretty for anyone. But what really started to move the needle forward is when it was suggested that I start to see a somatic therapist. And I was like, soma what? What is somatic, right? And soma means body-based. So I started working with a therapist to heal the imprints of trauma through the body. More specifically, I was told your nervous system is stuck in a state of survival. And it has been for a long time. You're armored up and you don't need to be anymore. And so that work was really profound for me. Within a year, I had been able to get to a place where I no longer had to be on medication. My life completely changed. My relationships changed. I no longer was, found myself in these toxic environments, and the abusive relationship that I had, seemingly ended up in, that came to an end. The eating disorders started to fade away. The alcohol abuse started to fade away. And it was pretty remarkable because I felt like somatic therapy was really gentle. And I know we'll probably talk a lot about like what it actually looks like. But in traditional therapy, I just remember having to sit with my therapist and talk ad nauseum about all these horrific experiences in my life. And in some ways, I felt like it caused more harm than good at times. I'd be sessions feeling so anxious and feeling like I need a drink after that,
Yeah.
And somatic therapy was different. It was really gentle. It wasn't overwhelming. And so, yeah, I just got really fascinated. I'm a bit of a nerd. And I was like, what is happening, in these sessions? And I became obsessive. But then I was like, wow, this really works. And there's real science behind it. And it's been here for a while. It's just now starting to become mainstream. I want to learn more about this. And then I want to help people, in that space as well. So that was 13 years ago that I started seeing a somatic therapist. And now that's what I do today, in addition to some of the other hats that I still wear. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you for sharing the story. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I always, I've like, when I've talked about trauma related to me, I'm like, when I relate this story, I'm like, I don't want to like draw sympathy, but I also like when I'm like listening to this, I'm like, I don't want to be like put off and be like, oh, I don't want to. But yeah, I'm sorry to hear that happened, but it's great to hear about the healing journey too.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
And yeah, I think this idea of, I mean, I definitely relate to like having been to therapy and I'm like, did that session help me at all? I feel worse than when I went in now. And I mean, and sometimes that's what you need. You need to feel worse to get better.
Yeah.
But it's also with trauma that's not always I can see that being a very tricky issue. Like that's you don't want to then spiral further down with what's going on there.
Spiral. Yeah. We call it the trauma vortex. We don't want to be thrown deeper into the deep end, which is where trauma can seemingly leave us. So, yeah, it can. I always say, and I know when we talk today, I just want to say this from the beginning because I think it's important. I do think that traditional therapy is incredibly beneficial.
Mhm.
And my book that came out a month ago, it's called Body First Healing. There's a reason why it says body first, not body only.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is because when we work to heal trauma, trauma can be defined as like any experience that overwhelms the nervous system's capacity to cope. And when that happens, your nervous system gets stuck in, kind of like I mentioned earlier, survival mode. More specifically, what we call a stress response cycle. So you get stuck in a fight response, a flight response, shutdown, freeze, functional freeze, fawn.
Mhm.
And when you're stuck in that kind of chronic stress response, there are parts of the brain that aren't super easy to access or work with or guide, like your cognitive brain. And cognitive behavioral therapy focuses all on thinking things out, right?
Yeah.
Talking things out. And so I think that's why oftentimes people feel like they're hitting a wall with therapy because we're missing a big part of the puzzle, and that is the body approach. And only when we start to regulate the nervous system and kind of shut off or, turn down that stress response or that alarm in the body, do we start to then have access back to our cognition, our prefrontal cortex. And so I think that most modalities out there are wonderful for the right person if used at the right time and in the right order.
Yeah.
So yeah, I still work with a conventional talk therapist and I have a somatic therapist too. And they both provide incredible, support in their own way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can also see like, well, especially with like CBT for trauma stuff there, because you have this like CBT, like, we're going to challenge these thoughts. Is this a real thought? I'm like, well, it did happen before.
Mhm.
I was like,
Yeah,
okay, yeah, I can see not always the best for trauma.
sure.
I've definitely had that with things where I'm like, yeah, well, I know this isn't going to happen again, but it did happen.
Right.
Mm.
Yep.
Uh, but yeah, and it's really interesting. So you're saying that the somatic therapy has been around for a while, but it's not something I've heard a lot about. Um, which I can see why it's become a passion to like kind of spread this information, because
Yeah.
I have heard some about it, but it's just always in bits and pieces and not something where I'm like, I've ever done a deep dive into it.
Yeah. So, so there's different modalities of somatic therapy. So the one that I specifically am trained in is called somatic experiencing. There's other forms such as, somatic psychology, sensory motor system, somatics, and lots of others. But somatic experiencing in particular, I can speak to, that was actually developed back in the 70s by Dr. Peter Levine. And he was a psychologist at the time, trauma researcher at UC Berkeley. And he kind of proposed this really interesting question of, animals in the wild are always faced with threat. They're in survival mode all the time. So why, unlike human animals, why do they not remain traumatized was the question.
Mm-hmm.
And like us human animals do. And the reason he asked this question is because human animals compared to wild animals, we have the same identical nervous systems, the same working systems. And the reason for that is because human animals, he studied through ethology, wild animals allow themselves to go through that stress response cycle. So when the nervous system and the body and the subconscious brain goes into survival mode, and what happens is there's adrenaline and cortisol that comes into the body, our stress hormones or our survival hormones. They're there to initiate or mobilize us to fight or flee. If those hormones are not discharged or expelled or released from the body, those stress hormones become chronic stress. And over time, that chronic stress, again, we're stuck in the stress response cycle, that chronic stress starts to create mental, emotional, and physical health issues. And so it's like the nervous system is stuck in the past. And one of Peter's quotes is that it's like when a devastating moment becomes frozen in time
Mm-hmm.
and have this internal straitjacket where we're frozen in the past. And it's like the brain knows I'm safe, the trauma is over, but the nervous system hasn't gotten the memo yet. And it's still stuck in the past trying to survive. And so he noticed that animals in the wild will do these natural primal mechanisms through the body, through the muscles, through their bodies to discharge or release those hormones. So I'm sure I'll say it now and then I encourage everyone to go look up on Google animals discharging in the wild. And you'll see that they allow themselves to they just tremble and they shake. And sometimes you'll see their mouths just kind of rah, 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 right? They're roaring. And there's little things that they do to allow the body to let go of that adrenaline and cortisol. But as human animals, we have what wild animals don't have, which is this thinking brain, this human brain, this neocortex, our conscious brain. And we are constantly judging our emotions, judging our feelings. No, I need to calm down when I'm anxious. So I just need to I need to breathe right now and just make the shaking go away. Or when I'm angry and I feel heated, it's nope, I'm not allowed to be angry, or I'm not allowed to set a boundary, or oh, am I being too much? Am I being dramatic? Right. So we are really good at suppressing and overriding and disrupting our very natural emotions and feelings. And so, anyways, all that to say, that was a lot of Peter's work. And it takes roughly, you could say roughly 20 years, they say on average 17 years for practice to reach modern medicine, modern practice. And so somatic experiencing has been around since the late 70s, the early 80s. And to this day, I think there's 60, 70,000 somatic experiencing practitioners all over the world and climbing. But it was really around the early 2000s that the somatic world started to become more prevalent. And then with the book, The Body Keeps the Score. Are you familiar with that book?
Yeah, I've heard a lot about it. I've heard some good, some bad.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a really heavy book.
Mhm.
It's very heavy. Um, as in it can be triggering for some, but there's a lot of great science to it. So Bessel van der Kolk is the author. It's now a New York Times bestseller. It came out in 2014, but it didn't become a bestseller until years later.
Mhm.
When again, this body psychology, somatic psychology started to hit the mainstream. And so now it seems that in the trauma space, especially therapists, they're now adding somatic practices into the work that they're already doing, which is really incredible to see.
Yeah, and I can see definitely the idea of holding on to things in your body being like, we have this idea of this like the mind body connection, but I'm like, it's just one thing. And so, yeah, holding that kind of stuff is going to have these downline effects that are fairly detrimental.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's and also too, there's our formative years, our first 3 years are really important for nervous system development, but also our first 6 years are really important for nervous system development. And what I often find in my practice and working with clients over the years is that, like me, people will come into the work because they recognize the symptoms. Hey, I'm using substances, or hey, I have really bad anxiety, or hey, I have digestive issues. There's a lot of physical symptoms too to nervous system dysregulation when we're stuck in survival mode, digestive issues, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, TMJ, migraines, very, very common. And so they'll come in with these symptoms and they'll say, and I think it's tied to this chronic stress in my life, my job, or, oh, I experienced trauma like I did, these acute traumas. And then when we get deeper into the work, they find, oh, there's some stuff from my earlier years that actually set the blueprint and the template for a nervous system that wasn't built to withstand these things that I'm experiencing. So for instance, there's a lot of studies done with PTSD in soldiers, and they'll find that what makes it different, like who gets PTSD? And it's usually the soldiers who had adverse childhood experiences
Mm.
compared to the soldiers who did not have adverse childhood experiences. And that's because, again, if trauma is anything that overwhelms your nervous system, right? You have these individuals who grew up in an environment where maybe there was a lot of attachment, secure, good attachment with their caregivers. They grew up in a regulated environment, in a safe environment, in an attuned environment. Therefore, their nervous system had this foundation, had this soil to really flourish and become resilient, which made them less vulnerable to trauma later on in life. And so in my case, when I was born, I didn't find out about this until I was a teenager, but when I was born, I was actually taken from my mother at birth and I was put into foster care for a few months because there was methamphetamine found in our system. My mom experienced a lot of trauma as well when she was pregnant with me. She was homeless, living out of a car. And so that impacted my nervous system
Yeah.
quite a bit and my ability to move through difficult things later on in life. So what I'm getting at here is that people often assume, again, it's these big traumas in their life that happen, not recognizing that those smaller moments, and I know that doesn't sound like a small moment, but those smaller moments of like, I had a roof over my head and food on the table, but I was never told I love you. or my parents were stressed all the time, or I felt like I was walking on eggshells, or my parents were helicopter parents and they were anxious. Therefore, my nervous system felt anxious. There's so many things that contribute to our nervous system's ability to move through stress that we often find when we get into the work. It's like, oh, there's deeper stuff here. So a
Yeah.
lot of the work starts back there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I imagine, yeah, because there's also, I've seen studies about, this could be savage, like the siege of Leningrad, and all the children born during that time had problems with their nervous systems later because of the stress that their mothers were under when they were born.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah, and one thing I speak to in my book, Body First Healing, is also intergenerational trauma. And I'm not sure if that's a concept you're familiar with, but essentially how trauma can get passed down from generation to generation. We call it transmission. Um, but research shows that it can be passed down within at least 3 to 5 generations. And what it does is it can impact your stress hormones, your hormone levels. It can impact your DNA. It can impact your belief systems. And one of the studies they did at Mount Sinai, they did the Holocaust studies, and they found that great grandchildren of Holocaust survivors had markedly higher stress hormones within their body and their physiology compared to descendants of non-Holocaust survivors.
mhm.
And so that's also part of the work when people get into it and they're like, I have these symptoms, but I haven't been through anything. And so that's a form of what we call indirect trauma. And there's incredible research on that. A book I would recommend is called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. It's incredible, amazing. And it's very hands-on too. It gives you like, certain lineage trees that you can do and things like that.
Yeah. I imagine that. Yeah. Because there's a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, nothing happened to me, but I'm still struggling for whatever reason.
Right.
Um, and it can be, well, maybe it didn't happen to you, or maybe it's just something you're not. We all kind of think we have normal childhoods.
Right.
And then sometimes you tell a story and people are like, what?
That's not normal. Yeah. Right.
And I think this is especially with like ADHD. There's things about how often people get corrected, and because
Mhm.
yeah, as a ADHD child, you're gonna be impulsive and acting out and doing things that you're gonna have a lot of those corrections over and over and over again,
Yeah.
which kind of, while isn't a singular source of trauma, over time builds up who you are as a person, being like, oh, I'm gonna always be in trouble.
Yeah, we call that chronic. So when we look at the categories of direct trauma, there's acute trauma, which I mentioned earlier, which is like that single event, that shock trauma. But what often gets overlooked is chronic trauma. And chronic trauma is not an event, it's an experience that happens over time with no real beginning, middle, and end. And it's very, it's not glaringly obvious. And that certainly would be one of those experiences.
Yeah, it was funny when I was doing with my talk therapist and talk about things being like, oh, my priorities are based on me trying to not get in trouble.
Mm,
That's something to kind of explore more.
yeah,
Like,
absolutely. And then from a somatic lens, we would say, let's say that you and I were in a session together and you told me that. And I would say, is there a moment recently where you felt like you might be in trouble for something? And you might start walking me through a moment recently where I'm just making up a story. Maybe like, oh, a couple weeks ago, my boss sent me this email. He said, we need to talk. And there was nothing there. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. And I would say, and as you're thinking about that right now, what do you notice in your body? And you might notice, oh, there's a heart beating. I might notice that I feel constriction up in my shoulders. I might notice that my diaphragm is pulled up and it's hard to breathe. There's a lump in my throat. And what I would say is, okay, and can we track that for a moment and just see what happens next? And the next, it's like, okay. And then, so a somatic session is very slow and there's not a lot of talking.
mhm.
And so we just kind of follow the body, we follow the nervous system. And then you might notice that there's like oh, and you kind of lean forward. And I would say, what's happening now? And you're like, I just kind of like want to hide a little bit. And I would say, is that okay for that to be here? You'd allow that to be here. And then maybe a moment later, you might sit back up and then look up or something. You might notice now there's tears And now there's like natural discharge happening from the body. And so what we work with in the somatic space is body memory, right? So there's explicit or verbal memory, which is what you work with in cognitive therapy. But in the body memory, Bessel van der Kolk says trauma doesn't necessarily always come back as a memory. It comes back as a reaction.
Mhm.
And it's what we call procedural memory, or kind of like muscle memory, of how our nervous system or our body has learned to react or respond to things, right? So anytime I'm in trouble, my stomach drops, my shoulders close, and I want to hide. And so we're stuck in that loop, right? That maybe doesn't serve us. And so instead, it's like, I might recommend after a moment, I might say, is it okay to just allow the spine to lift a little bit and see just what happens if we actually take up a little bit of space with our chest? And that's going to feel really foreign and really scary, but we're breaking muscle memory, right? And so as you take on that new posture, it's like, oh, and then you take a breath. And I'm like, did you just notice the breath that you took? So in SE work, somatic experiencing, we call it SE. In SE work, we work with body memory to change our habitual reactions and muscle memory and responses, what we call our procedural patterns, to create new behaviors. But the tagline is that we're allowing the body and the nervous system to do now what it couldn't do back then. Right? Maybe back then we learned, like, when I'm in trouble, that meant that I wasn't safe because maybe I would get punished in some way. And so then that's how I've learned to hide. But the nervous system is stuck there. So now it's like, how can we show the nervous system that we can have a different choice, allowing it to do now what it couldn't do back then? I just went off on a tangent. Sorry.
Oh no, I think it's really helpful for people to hear like how that kind of works, because I'm sure it's very confusing when you're like, okay, this is something in the body, but what does it actually look like?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's kind of shrouded in mystery. And I always tell people it's hard to know unless you've actually gone through a session what it looks like. So that's why I like to give just little examples of how that feels, or, what that experience is like.
yeah. And one of the things I'm thinking here too is, so like, this is something where it's important to like, yes, work with the practitioner, and something where you're like really trying to feel this experience while releasing the tension from your body, rather than just, you can't just yoga your way out of it.
No. Yeah. We unfortunately cannot yoga our way out of it. Yeah. So when we're yeah, it can be very beneficial and supportive to work with a practitioner. In the book Body First Healing, I do provide like a bit of, it's not an introductory roadmap. I would say it's a bit deeper than an introduction. But there, of course, are certain things in the book where I'm like, this is something you should probably do with a practitioner. Um, but the thing I love about somatic experiencing, and I think a lot of the somatic modalities out there in general, somatic experiencing, the definition of it again is a naturalistic approach to trauma resolution through the body. But that word naturalistic, there was intention behind that word when Peter developed SE. And naturalistic is essentially pointing to the fact that we have these natural abilities built within our body, our biology. We are hardwired to self-heal. We are a self-correcting system. And so a lot of the work that we do is we're actually not taking people out of their bodies, trying to find fixes out here. We are posturing people to look inward to, oh, my body knows exactly what to do if I just allow it to do the thing. So in moments where it's like, I'm feeling some anxiety, how often are we like, oh, I'm feeling anxious, I need to make this go away? And what happens is when we war against or resist the very natural experiences that our body is having, there's no such thing as a bad emotion. There is such thing as a really uncomfortable emotion. But when we war against it, we actually create more stress and resistance in the body. What we call we increase our stress response, which then just creates more of the anxiety or more of the thing. But it takes our body, when we get good at it, it can take our body only 90 seconds to move through a moment of what we call activation, that stress response cycle. I know I had to push back our call a little bit today because I was driving home from West Texas. And there were some moments that were a little sketchy with some bad weather. And I was just tracking my nervous system. I was like, I am gripping the wheel. My pupils are dilated. My heart is racing out of my chest. But I know that this storm will pass. And our bodies are the same way. It's just that we're really good at like staying out of our body and staying up in our head. So, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of see it as like our body trying to protect ourselves, but then falling into a maladaptive behavior where it's just like, hey, this worked in the past to protect us. Let's do it again and again.
Exactly. It's like these strategies just need some updating.
Mhm.
They're just old and outdated. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think this is also something to like, so if we're like finding ourselves like with these chronic it's like I'm always tight, it doesn't matter how much stretching I do. Is this like
Mhm.
kind of a thing that people should kind of like, oh, I should look into? Is this something where known or unknown, I have something that I need to work through?
Yeah, so it could be there could be a number of reasons for it, but the body is always showing us. Well, it's always communicating to us. So first of all, there are certain points in the body where if there's tightness, if there's tension, if there's constriction, it usually means something and it's showing us a lot about our history. So for instance, if we have digestive issues can usually be tied back to moments of extreme fear, terror. Um, if we have, if we feel tension on the right side of the body, which is where the liver is. This isn't always the case, but usually the liver is the organ of anger, right? So it's like, oh, do I have some suppressed anger in my life? If we feel lower back pain, that's usually where the adrenals are. Have I been running from a saber-toothed tiger my entire life, right? Is there something, my adrenals are shot, right? That's usually because there's chronic stress or some kind of chronic trauma that we haven't faced. Um, Migraines, right? Certain migraines can mean certain things. But yeah, I would say that it's less about knowing why we're feeling the way that we are.
Mhm.
And it's more so about just allowing that experience to be there and then providing support and tools to help the nervous system to kind of unbound. So when we're in a place of regulation, which is kind of like rest and digest, the upgraded science from the polyvagal theory, it's called your ventral vagal state. It's your state of safety and connection. So when we're in that rest and digest or ventral state, the body feels and the muscles and the cardiovascular system, the digestive system, urinary system, the endocrine system, everything is in homeostasis. We feel settled, we feel at ease. But as soon as we go into that activated stress response, everything changes. Everything changes, our digestion, our hormones, all those things I just mentioned. And so over time, if we're stuck in chronic stress, we might not recognize that there are parts of our viscera or our organs or our muscles that are actually bracing and clenching. And over time, when we're not in ease, that means that we're in dis-ease, which then over time creates disease.
Mhm.
80% of women in particular, they're 80% more likely to experience autoimmune diseases and chronic illness and digestive issues. And we know that women, there's a lot of like self-silencing. Women hold down a lot of right anger, and anger is probably the most highly charged emotion. So there's a lot of research that ties back to that. And there's also another study that came out from the University of, I think it was the University of Minnesota. Don't quote me on that, everyone. But there's a study that came out that essentially found that women who silence themselves in arguments with their spouses, right, they don't share their emotions freely, that they are 4 times more likely to die of early death by holding in these emotions. And so, again, when we look at tension patterns in the body, it's usually emotions or something that we've been holding in or containing or, suppressing or pushing down.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And
Mhm.
just, yeah, having been in situations where I'm holding back emotions and then just like not having released it, like afterwards, I just feel terrible. It's just,
Yeah.
oh, I can,
And I just noticed that breath you just took. Yeah, it's like I want to release it. And I will say too, it doesn't always have to be an emotion. Sometimes it can be a way that we feel, or a boundary, or something that we think, or our opinion, right? What we're really holding back or holding in is our voice and our authenticity. And again, we live in a time where people are really disconnected from their authenticity and what they really want. There's a lot of people pleasing in the world. There's a lot of foregoing and sacrificing our boundaries for hustle culture to get ahead, right? Burnout is on the rise, and that's because we are pushing ourselves past our boundaries and we're not listening to our authentic boundaries of, yeah, that's actually outside of my capacity and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, often we like have this like, oh yeah, I can just keep going until I break down. I'm like, let's not do that. Like, I don't want like the realization when someone says do your best, it doesn't mean give everything you have plus 10%. It means just whatever you have right now, just do that.
Yes. Whatever your capacity is enough.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, a lot of us don't know what our capacity is because again, we're so like, even when you think about your to-do list, and I still do this, I'm like, what's my to-do list for the week? And I think of all the stuff I need to get done. Again, I think of all the stuff that I need to get done, but I don't ever check in. But do we ever check in with our body and we're like, but how do I want to feel this week? And it's like we fill our calendars. There's no white space, but we're completely exhausted, right? So, and that definitely leads to nervous system dysregulation.
Yeah, I was using a planner on point, and it had like just had a line at the end like, and what's one fun thing you're doing today? And like when I went for a week when I wasn't filling that line out, and I'm like, oh, that's that. Why am I doing this?
Yeah. Yeah. We just, we're on autopilot. Um, it's a state I talk about a lot in my book. It's called functional freeze. So we have these states of the nervous system, what we call our primary states, right? There's primary colors, secondary colors, all the same. So these are our primary states. So it's fight, flight, rest and digest, which is ventral, and then not freeze, but what we now call shut down or dorsal. And that's where like burnout, fatigue, depression really lives. And then we have blended states. Freeze is actually one of our blended states. It's a mixed state. So it's a little bit of a flight response because there's so much charge,
Mhm.
but there's shut down at the same time. So it's like one foot on the pedal, gas, one foot on the brakes, deer in the headlights. But we don't get stuck in freeze. We're not like stuck in that frozenness. It's more so shut down. But other blended states, another one is fawn, which I know people are very familiar with. That's a little bit of flight as well. So there's a lot of fear in our fawn response, and then shut down. So we shut down our own wants, our own needs, our own boundaries and desires because we are afraid of rejection. We're afraid of conflict, confrontation. And so we people please, we pacify, we placate, we keep the peace, but we sacrifice our own peace. And then functional freeze is another blended state that is very, very prevalent today, especially in our super fast paced world. And that is a little bit of that shutdown response, kind of where that freeze comes in, but also a flight response. So we're functioning, we are going through life. And what we say with the functional freeze state is that we're going through the motions, but without emotion. So we're armoring up, we are functioning, we're getting things done. But again, we're not in touch with our body. We're not in touch with our emotional landscape. And over time, that starts to wear on us. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I know with ADHD, a lot of us have a lot of trouble with having that interoception and knowing how we're feeling, and
Yeah.
I can imagine that only just adds to things when like, because yeah, I'll be sitting in a chair in a funny position, and then like an hour later, I'm like, oh, this really hurts. I should have
Mm.
moved like 45 minutes ago.
Sure. Yeah. So, can I give you a tool to use for noticing feelings?
Yeah, sure, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, one of the tools we love using in somatic experiencing, essentially, when someone proposes the question, how do I feel a feeling? This is what we give them. So, it's this concept called SciBAM. And SciBAM stands for sensation, image, behavior, affect, which means emotion, and meaning. So often when we feel a feeling, people assume that we have to be like, well, what's the emotion? And feelings are so much more than just emotions. So you can start to track, like if you don't have an emotional language, it's like, I'm feeling something right now and I don't know what this is. Well, what's the sensation? I'm noticing there's constriction. I'm noticing I'm really hot. I'm noticing I'm sweating. I'm noticing, again, my stomach is in knots, or I feel kind of numb. Feeling numb is actually a feeling, by the way. Numb is a feeling. The next one is image. So maybe people don't have a language, they're like, I can't really track what's going on in my body, introception. I don't know what's emotionally going on. And so instead it's like, is there an image that comes to mind right now as you think about how you're feeling? And it's like, yeah, there's this weight. There's this big brick on my shoulders. Yeah. So things feel heavy. Yeah, things feel heavy right now. And then that might lead them to something else. Next is behavior. So if we don't have any of the other letters, maybe behavior is noticing, are there any micro movements or impulses of the body? So SE practitioners are also essentially trained ethologists, but we study human animals. So we study like your body language, the way that your shoulders come down, the way that, their lower diaphragm just opened up, or I'm noticing they're tilting, or their eyes are doing this. There are little micro movements that you might be doing. Right now I'm noticing my feet are very crossed. They're like double crossed. Right. What's that about? Or it's like, I don't know how I'm feeling, but I'm noticing that I'm really fidgety right now. And I'm like, I'm twirling my rings. Oh, I wonder if I feel anxious. Right. So that can give you some idea. Affect is emotion. So is there an emotional language that's happening? And the last one is meaning, which a lot of us are really good at. So, well, I don't know how I'm feeling in my body. I don't know what the emotion is, but I know what the meaning is. And the meaning is I want to get the hell out of here. Right. So like, what's the story? So feelings don't always have to be emotions or sensations. Sometimes exploring the other elements of SciBAM can help us to make room to experience it more.
Great. I think that's, because too often I'm just like, I don't know how I feel. And like,
And
oh, how did that make you feel? I don't know. It was not good.
it really is, though. It's a language that happens over time.
Mhm.
And when you work with a somatic experiencing practitioner, they will provide you, and I provide this in the book, we have a vocabulary list of 90 vocabulary terms for sensations, like open, airy, right? Shaky, buzzy, all these different things. And then there's also an emotion wheel, because this is really like a language that we're learning, and we're not really good at it most of the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm thrilled that my kids have like this like emotional learning stuff that's in school now, but definitely not something that I ever grew up with.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm the same way. I saw when I went to Target last year, you know how at Target they have all the little front rows with all the like little $5 things. There was a whole little section you could tell it was for little kids, and it was the calming corner stuff. And there was like a little emotion poster and like a little whiteboard thing and a calming corner sign. So I made a calming corner for my kids. And I was thinking back, I'm like, yeah, that wasn't anything I was given. It's like, go to your room and go take care of yourself, right? Go deal with it on your own.
Yeah. You don't show you can be fine as long as you're not showing negative emotions,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and don't get too excited either.
Right. Exactly. Calm down. Yeah. Be quiet. Keep it down a little bit.
Yeah. So one thing I just was also want to make sure we hit is I'm sure some people listening to this were like, oh, I would love to find a therapist, somatic therapist. What would be a good way for someone to like try and look into this? Because we know not all therapists are equal.
Right. Yeah. So, so there are two places you could look. If you're looking for a specific somatic therapist that's trained in somatic experiencing, then you can go to traumahealing.org, and there is going to be a practitioner directory that's global. So you can look by the region that you're in, state you're in, town that you're in. You can look by specialties. So like, what are they also trained in, whether it's attachment, relationships, grief, substance abuse, things like that. You can also look for whether or not they're in person or virtual. So if you're looking for a specific SEP, go to traumahealing.org, and that's our Somatic Experiencing International. That's our website. If you're looking for someone who's just trained in somatics, but not the full somatic experiencing modality, then you can go to theembodylab.com. And they also have a practitioner directory. And these are more so therapists and practitioners who've added just certifications to the work that they do. These are usually like 6-month certifications. To become an SEP, it's a 3-year process. It's like going back to school. So it's pretty intense. But there are wonderful practitioners and therapists who aren't all the way trained in SE, but they do have a lot of the great working foundational knowledge of somatic work. So the Embody Lab also has a very similar directory that's international. And then if you want to work with me, you can go to bodyfirsthealing.com because I do Body First Healing. The book that I wrote is based on my Body First Healing program, which I created back in 2017. And it's a 6-month group healing program. And people can join it at any time. So it's a live program, but it's also an online program as well.
Awesome. Well, we're coming up on time here, so I was wondering if there's just like any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with.
Yeah, I would say, I think one of the things that I found personally helped me most in this work is when you start to get into the science and the understanding of your body, your biology, your nervous system, you recognize that you were never broken and that your symptoms make sense and that there's nothing wrong with you and that you don't need to be fixed and that your body and brain were brilliantly built to help you survive in the worst of conditions. But that, again, it's a self-correcting system and that you can self-heal and turn inward. It's just about kind of reclaiming or rediscovering what those tools are. So yeah, I think that was probably the biggest thing for me is recognizing, oh, I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. And that's what I hear from so many of the clients that I've worked with over the years is just this permission and kind of this self-compassion of that awareness. So
Awesome. And we know we just hit it a second ago, but if people want to hear more about your stuff, where should they go?
yeah, so you can connect with me directly on Instagram at Heal with Britt or TikTok at Heal with Britt with 2 T's. And if you want to learn more about the book, my program, or the work that I do, or working with me, you can go to bodyfirsthealing.com.
Awesome. I'll get all that in the show notes, and so people can find you pretty easily. So, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is an incredible conversation. I think people are getting a lot out of it.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thanks again to Britt for coming on the show, and thank you for sticking with us all the way to the end. If you want to find out more about Britt and her work, be sure to check out her website, bodyfirsthealing.com, or go find her book anywhere books are sold, Body First Healing. Before you go, though, let's do a quick rundown of today's top tips. 1. Somatic practices are body-based approaches to healing that focus on how trauma and stress are held in the nervous system, rather than just in the mind. They employ gentle techniques such as tracking body sensations, subtle movements, and breathing to help the body complete its stress response cycle. 2. SciBAM is a tool from somatic experiencing that helps track your internal state when your emotions feel vague or difficult to name. It stands for sensation, image, behavior, effect, and meaning. It begins by noticing physical sensations, such as tightness, warmth, or buzzing, and then observing if any mental images arise. It is followed by observing your body's behavior or impulses, like fidgeting or leaning forward, and from there checking for any identifiable emotions and noticing what meaning or story you attach to that experience. 3. If you feel stuck in the same emotional patterns and if stress, anxiety, or trauma seem to live in your body, showing up as chronic tension, pain, or fatigue, somatic therapy could be an option for you. Somatic work can give you tools to gently release that stuck survival energy and restore a sense of calm. 4. When dealing with trauma, you don't have to go it alone, but it is important to work with a practitioner who understands what they're doing. And understand that somatic therapy is just one of many options that can help you get the help that you need. Alright, that's it. Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear what you thought of this episode. Feel free to connect with me over at hackingyyouradhd.com. If you'd like links or to read this episode's transcript, you can go to the show notes page at hackingyyouradhd.com/234. If you'd like even more Hacking Your ADHD, be sure to sign up for my newsletter, Any and All Distractions, which comes out every other week. In it, I give out my best distractions of the week, be they what I'm reading, what I'm playing, or what I'm watching. I also try to give a few bits of actionable advice in each newsletter. That sounds like something you're interested in? Head on over to hackingyouradhd.com/newsletter to sign up. I also want to let you know about the Patreon that I've been reworking. You can easily find that at hackingyouradhd.com/Patreon, where you can also get access to the Hacking Your ADHD Discord. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/@hackingyouradhd. And finally, if you'd like another way to support the show, the best way to do so is to tell someone about the show, especially if you think a particular episode would resonate with them. Just click the share button on your podcast player. And now for your moment of dad. What do you call an elephant that doesn't matter? An irrelevant.